Hi class, I'll be speaking to you about Carl Rogers and Michael White. Carl Rogers was born in 1902 and died in 1987. He was the son of Walter A. Rogers and Julia M. Cushing. The family was very tight and were devout Pentecostal Christians. Rogers developed a new theory for psychologists to treat patients, which he called the humanistic theory. Rogers called into question the psychoanalytical model of the day, looking instead to replace it with his humanistic psychology theory. His goal was to acknowledge the development of the Rogerian psychotherapy model and its validation through scientific study and clinical experiences. Rogers argued that the therapist-patient relationship had to be affected, and to do so, it must include an intentional relationship built on mutual trust and respect. He believed that a person had to be comfortable with themselves just as they are to be able to move forward and change. He felt for a person to properly grow and develop, they needed to be in an environment that allowed them genuineness, openness and self-disclosure, acceptance, and empathy. He said that all humans can obtain their goals, wishes, and desires in life, and when they do this, they have achieved self-actualization. He believed a person's growth did not ever come to an end, but instead that we are all constantly developing. Rogers said that a client's world was how they perceived it. The reality, whether it was true or not, was their reality. Rogers' thought was by adjusting a person's perception of their self-image and self-worth, as well as making an ideal self more realistic, it would bring the client's self-perception closer to the actual truth. Rogers emphasized that a person's personality was not cookie cutter, and it is entirely unique to that person. This is not unlike a Christian's view of how God designed them, each unique and created for its own special purpose. Most people are searching for the good life. The good life, as described by Rogers, is achieved by a person fulfilling and accepting certain principles. Rogers found during his studies and observations that there are commonalities among those who are fully functional. These are an acceptance of all their experience, including new or old, or both good and bad. A lifestyle in which each moment is appreciated and lived to its fullest, meaning that a person is in the present right now, living in that moment, not focused and lost in the past or continuously looking ahead to the future. A person's trust level with their own decisions. They need to be comfortable standing behind and acknowledging their decisions. Increased freedom of choice that comes with the aforementioned qualities. Creativity and adaptability without necessarily conforming, meaning be open to looking at new ways and ideas even though you may not choose to follow them. Reliability and constructiveness in dealing with others. Basically, let your word be your word and stand behind it, and consistently be that person. A preference for living a rich, full life. A person, basically meaning a person that is happy must decide to be happy. These traits are fluid in their expression, with the person's being capable of self-actualization. They are ever evolving. I found studying Rogers that his own Christian background was ever present in his work. He recognized a person as unique and special. Just as God gives us free will to choose, Rogers also mentioned this when he said part of the therapy was that a person had to choose to be happy. When I look at Rogers' ideas compared to Freud, I see that he saw individualism, where Freud said people only belong in three main types. For my next theorist, Michael White. Michael White was born in Adelaide, South Australia in 1948. He began his professional career working with probation and welfare recipients, and he completed his undergraduate degree in social work at the University of South Australia. White began working at Adelaide Children's Hospital as a psychiatric social worker. White, along with his colleague and friend David Epson, developed the narrative therapy, which is based on the view that people are separate from their problems. Narrative therapy contends that people are skilled and able to improve their lives, and that therapy is a collaborative effort between the therapist and the client. White felt that therapy practitioners serve as a client's collaborator in creating a coherent narrative of their life. His therapy has the therapist asking questions that were designed to pull out more details and emotions, sensations about specific events in the client's life. He spoke out against diagnostic labels, much like Rogers did. He saw them as counterproductive. Practitioners in narrative therapy argue that people's lives are shaped by their experiences, and that people's identity are a product of their own unique experiences and stories. As White gets the client to tell their story, clients are able to gain a better objective of their own lives and are less likely to see themselves as just a passive observer in their own lives. Narrative therapy aims to explore the effects and the problems it has on a person's life, rather than labeling the person as the problem. The therapist helps a client notice and contextualize a particular theme in their lives and in their problems. For example, if a client has a history of dating a dangerous partner, the therapist might help the client notice the pattern, the early warning signs that they miss or that they ignore that causes them to repeat dating the wrong person. Narrative therapy also helps the client clarify their own values and feelings. Interesting, White's therapy sometimes calls for the client's friends, family, or even his previous clients to come to a session to help the current client by offering their perceptions and insight of the client's pattern and problems. Narrative therapy helps the client to externalize the problem, showing the client that the problem can be separated from their identity or sense of self-ego, and therefore giving them the power to change and overcome it. Although narrative therapy remains popular, there have been few practical studies on the practice of this theory, so its long-term effectiveness and scientific validity are unknown at this time. It is not noted whether Michael White was a Christian or not, but I can see some Judeo-Christian values in his work. He incorporated a trust relationship that the client and the therapist maintains. That trust is very important to healing. This is how Christians view their relationship with God. It is when we trust and lean into Him that we find our greatest healing. White also refused to lump clients into categories. Instead, he viewed each of them as individuals and special. Each of their stories unique to them, just as God writes our own unique stories. When we confess our sins to God, we share our problems with Him. This helps us see our situation more clearly, find where we can change, and helps us make those changes. I plan to study more on the techniques of both Carl Rogers and Michael White to see how to incorporate them into my practice along with God's will and guidance. Thank you for your time.